Hi, in this video I'm going to go through some of the terms and definitions for working with exponents and roots. You should have this piece of paper and copy in the notes on your paper as I'm going through them on the video. So the definition for the base is a factor that is multiplied repeatedly. So again, you're copying this down on your sheet as I'm writing them here. If you need to pause the video at any point to catch up, feel free to do so. So an example of this factor being multiplied repeatedly would be 2 to the fourth. We know that that means 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. The 2 is the number that is being multiplied repeatedly, so this thing is the base. B-A-S-E. Sorry for the messy B there. The exponent we know is the 4 here. The definition for that is how many times the factor is repeatedly multiplied. Repeatedly, there's an L in there, multiplied. So if we had the question 1/3 to the fourth, actually let's do 1/3 to the third, we know that means 1/3 times 1/3 times 1/3, which is 1/27th, and we know that this 3 here is the exponent. It tells us to write out 1/3 3 times. All right. So now we're going to move to questions with root symbols. So as an example, we know this calculation means the square root of 25, which you think to yourself, what number times itself is 25? We know that's 5. I want to start with some definitions. The radicand is the quantity inside the root symbol. The quantity inside the root symbol. This thing is the root symbol, so the radicand here is the 25. The root, so here there's this is the square root of 25, sort of implies a 2 right there, because we're trying to find the number squared that would give us 25, so that's 5. The root is almost like the answer to this question. Definition I'm going to give here, it's the base, or the factor that is multiplied repeatedly, the base that corresponds to a given power. And it's almost like, as I said, the answer to the question. So if we had, again, the square root of 25, we know that equals 5. If we had the cube root of 8, I'm trying to ask myself, what number cubed gives us 8? That's what I'm thinking in my head, and we know that the answer to that is 2. These answers are the roots. And so you could say 2 is the third root of 8. Or you could say 2 is the cube root of 8, and 5 is the second root or square root of 25. The root index, it's the number that tells you which root to find. It's this thing, it's the 3 and the 2. So this, I'm going to say the number that indicates which root to find. Again, if I'm going too fast for you, you need to pause the video to get down the notes, feel free. So here, the root index, I could have the fourth root of 16. 4 is the root index. So this is the 4 we're talking about here. I'd be thinking to myself, which number to the fourth power gives me 16? And I know that's 2. So I would say 2 is the fourth root of 16. I could have a root index of 3 with a radicand of 125. I'm thinking to myself, what number cubed gives me 125? And I know 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. So 5 is the third root of 125. We know the square root, that's one of two equal factors of a number. So we could say the square root of 64 is 8, because 8 squared is 64. When there's a radicand symbol, or a root symbol, excuse me, and there's no number here, it implies it's a 2. So if I have 100 like this, or a 2 as a root index, the answer is 10. When there's no root index, we assume it's 2. And we know a cube root, move this up here, is one of 3 equal factors of a number. Cube root is with a root index of 3. What I'm thinking to myself here is, what number to the third power is 64? And it's 4. Or I could do the cube root of 216. And I happen to know that 6 cubed is 216. So those are some good definitions to have. We're going to be using those words a lot, so it's good to have the definition attached to them. I want you to turn the page over, and I'm just going to go through 3 of these together, and then you'll do the rest on your own for homework. So we're going to do number 2, number 3, number 7. So what I want to talk about here is the difference between when the negative is inside the parenthesis, or when there's no parenthesis, or even when it's outside. So in number 2, what's happening here is this negative is making the 4 negative. It's kind of like taking the opposite of 4, which is negative 4. And the squared, the exponent, is outside the parentheses. So what this means is negative 4 is being squared. So it's negative 4 times negative 4. And we know a negative times a negative is a positive. So this would be positive 16. In this question, when there's no parentheses, this negative is saying take the opposite of this thing. And the 2 we know is the exponent. Taking the opposite of something is like multiplying by negative 1. That's taking the opposite of something. And we know in our order of operations that exponents come before multiplication. So the way I see this in my head is it's really like this. The 4 is being squared to give us 16, and then we take the opposite of it, and it gives negative 16. Obviously, when we do a lot of these, we don't need to show our workout like this every time, but this shows you what's happening and the difference between these two questions. Here, the negative 4 is being squared, so it's negative 4 times negative 4. Here, the 4 is being squared, and then after it gets squared, the negative comes along, and you take the opposite of the answer. So in number 7, if I were to write this out, this negative tells me when I'm done, I take the opposite of something. This negative tells me the number that I'm multiplying 4 of them is a negative number. So it's negative 6 times negative 6 times negative 6 times negative 6. So this negative still comes down. I know negative times negative is a positive, times negative is a negative, times negative is a positive. So 4 negatives multiplied together give me a positive. And 6 to the 4th power I could do out if I needed to. I happen to know this is 1296. So then I take the opposite of 1296, which is negative 1296. So I want you to try the rest of these on your own. On part 1, I want you to show out the repeated multiplication like I did in all of these. Part 2, you don't need to do the step if you don't want to. And then in part 3, you're just writing it as a base and an exponent. You don't need to find the answer. You're just writing it as a question like in part 1 or part 2. So good luck. Obviously, we'll go over this tomorrow, so it's okay if you have questions on some or are confused on some. Thanks for watching.